Hi there, this is Hersh speaking. I wanted to present my response to the video on David Hersh as well as his paper and talk a little bit about neoliberalism. So, just reviewing the guiding questions for this assignment. We were supposed to talk about David Hersh's ideas and arguments. What do we think about Common Core standards? Why or why not? Who gets to make the decisions on what is being taught in schools and why? And do I get to make decisions about what I teach? And if so, what do I get to choose to teach? So, thinking about David Hersh's ideas and arguments, it seemed to me that listening to his lecture, he seemed to believe that Common Core standards were a really, really bad thing, and that the politicians and industry were having too much influence on education and what is being taught at school, and as well how the testing and assessments were being done, and the perturbing of the results for political gain. So he said that it seemed like a lot of people out there believe that standardized tests are seen as being objective, and he said that it's quite contrary to that they're not objective. He also seemed to be very down on the politicians in New York State, and everything seemed to be very New York State-centric as far as his arguments went and what he was talking about. For example, he said that Governor Cuomo blamed teachers for the students' low scores on tests, and that the teachers are resisting evaluation, and has suggested that they are inciting parental resistance to CCSS and standardized tests. So that may be true, but it seemed like, as an educator himself for 40 years, obviously he's seen a lot of coming and going of politicians and influence on the education system and that kind of stuff. But I don't know, having never been in shoes like that, I don't really have a good perspective on how bad state standards could be as far as using those as the basis to teach from, and standardized tests, that kind of stuff. Another topic of his was how industry seemed to have too much influence on schooling and education, and how kids were being taught. He made the argument that Bill Gates and his foundation was using their wealth to influence education policy, and although Bill Gates has no formal education, or no formal background in education. So, yeah, I think that's sour grapes of some sort. Sure, Bill Gates has a lot of money, and his foundations are doing a lot for the good of society, but how bad is it in regards to education? I'm not part of the conversation, so I can't really say how bad it really is. Another thing that he was down on was Pearson, which I understand is a big company that takes care of a lot of the assessments, and he seemed to indicate that they were commodifying education and marginalizing educators in the process. Like I said before, he's very New York-centric in his points of views and arguments. He stated that there was a lot of manipulation of the cut scores for the standardized tests, and that was politically motivated. And that a lot of this stuff in regards to education was motivated for campaign donations and that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of ins and outs. Listening to the presentation and reading the paper, talking about neoliberalism, and that I understand that it's important that we understand these points of view and that kind of stuff, but it said, I thought that there were a lot of words being used to explain something that was very common and basic to understand. What did I think about Common Core standards? Why or why not? Well, I think it's very important to have standards for all students to strive towards, and not different standards for different students. I also think that the minimum standard and the framework for what is to be taught in school, and I believe that they should be revisited and refined and amended and that kind of stuff, because they're a work in progress. It's not just the end-all and be-all. I think those are living documents that should be revisited and thought about and changed as society's requirements or needs change. Now, what are some of the arguments against? Well, this shouldn't be the only goal. For example, in testing, like we shouldn't teach to pass a test. I think that should just be Common Core state standards should just be a framework for this, a guideline for where we want to go towards and what we want to meet. I think that they might be overarching and not leave any room for flexibility. So again, they're just a guideline and the minimum. Who gets to make decisions and on what is taught in schools and why? Basically, I think society. That includes government, educators, parents, and students. I believe that all of those people in those groups have a vested interest in deciding what is taught and forming young minds to become productive members of society. And let's not just teach them, X, Y, and Z, but we want to understand as a group what we think are the important things that people should be taught. Do I get to make any decisions about what I teach? And if so, what do I get? What do I choose to teach? If I were an educator, if I'm not an educator, but if I were, I would expect that I would teach the curriculum given to me by the school and use that as a framework. If I wanted to diverge from that curriculum, I would ensure that I was changing the how I was teaching and not necessarily the requirements of what was expected of me. Again, standards are what they are, just a framework, a guideline, and I think there's got to be a little bit of wiggle room there, a little bit of flexibility. So that's all for now.